Hello, and welcome back to the Prince Armory Academy. In this project, we'll be crafting these gauntlets from the armor seen in Berserk. This is not your typical cosplay design, and I did my best to design something that functions properly, while still taking heavy inspiration from the source material, and injecting a little of my own design styles as well. If you know what this suit is, you know. If not, no spoilers. But the suit of armor this project is pulled from is from a popular manga, which if you oversimplify it, you could call an adult dark action fantasy. The patterns for this build and the rest of the armor will be available at the Prince Armory Academy, and yes, that means we are releasing the full head-to-toe suit. However, be aware this is an advanced build, so please visit our free resources and beginner's guide if you're just starting out, or take our online apprenticeship with guided projects, which will take your skills from beginner to advanced. I'll also preview a few of the new tools I'm releasing soon in this video. I'll be demonstrating the crafting process of leather here, and stay tuned for additional videos on how to make this in fun. I'm using Iron Oak vegetable tan leather for the majority of this build. Using vegetable tan leather means we can tool and shape the leather to a high degree. For gauntlets in particular, I like to use a few different thicknesses. I'll be cutting some 9 to 10 ounce leather panels which will be used for the wrists and cuffs. 7 to 8 ounce leather would also be quite viable here, and even easier to shape. For the more delicate finger parts, I'm using 5 to 6 ounce leather. For the backing and the retaining straps, I'm using kangaroo leather, which is only 2 to 3 ounces here, but it's very strong for its weight. You can use a lightweight veg tan, or even a sturdy chrome tan leather for this if you prefer though. The leather and the materials for this build were provided by Weaver Leather Supply, and if you want to build this project yourself, check the link in the description, head over to the website and get anything you need for your next build. Next, we need to cut the pieces. This project can be cut by hand with no issues using leather shears or a knife, but there's also many repetitive small pieces throughout this build, so if you have the option, I suggest cutting things out with a laser, and the vector files for laser cutting are included when you purchase the pattern. I'll be using the Creality Falcon 2 40-watt diode laser in this build. If you've been following this channel, you'll know that I introduced this previously in the Elven Gauntlet build, and I've been really impressed with its power, precision, and versatility, so I decided to use it for this project as well. As you can see, the laser made quick work of all the little finger parts. It even scored the reference labels and guidelines on each one. That's so handy. Get it? Handy. Because gauntlets. Handy. Just make sure you're cutting in a well-ventilated area. I'm cutting without the enclosure for the sake of filming here. It's also worth mentioning that Creality came out with an updated model since our last video. This one features a hard enclosed case, which should make it even easier to manage the fumes. Sometimes I see people get mad in the comments about my use of what they consider fancy tools in my projects and tutorials. I know most of you haven't been around since the beginning, but just be aware that I've already demonstrated with our beginner and intermediate tutorial series how to do all of this by hand, with a lot of hand-holding throughout. Just try to understand that I do have a business to run, and efficiency is important, and since I've already covered a lot of the starter content, this will be a reoccurring theme with upcoming more advanced projects, as I showcase more of our tools, advanced techniques, and processes. After you get your basic hand tools, I consider lasers an excellent early investment in your crafting journey, especially because these days the barrier to entry on laser ownership is lower than ever. I don't want to date myself too much, but back in my day, entry-level lasers like this weren't even a thing. My first laser setup was just under 15 grand, but now you can get started for even under $1,000 with something like the 22-watt version of the Falcon 2. That's crazy. I think there's a very strong case to be made for adding a laser to your toolset, and in my case, even if I only used my lasers for buckle strap cutting, they would have paid for themselves over and over, and the precision and convenience that lasers provide when making a complex project that has a lot of intricate components is invaluable. This is the kind of tool that can pay for itself very quickly if you put your mind to it. Here I'm cutting the retaining and backing straps from the kangaroo. The material curled more than I expected, however, and it got sliced to bits. I should have just enabled automatic tabs and light burn. When this feature is enabled, it prevents such issues. It lets you add little tabs that you can customize, where you can just pop out the piece from a sheet after it's cut. That wraps up the cutting process. The Creality Falcon 2 has my seal of approval. I highly recommend it, and I'll leave a link in the description. And again, this project can be cut by hand. Just print out the patterns, trace, and cut as demonstrated in our beginner videos. While we're still on the topic of making things quicker and more efficient, I want to share with you a new tool I've been working on. One of the techniques I've used over the years on our custom projects is this fluting detail. This is normally done with a process by hand, and if you're familiar with metal armor, it's a similar concept, though the technique to achieve it's a bit different in leather. The Berserk suit has a lot of this technique, so I want to make some tools to speed up the process. I designed these wheels to fit on a typical affordable bead roller that is used for sheet metal. What you're looking at here is a prototype for an embossing wheel that rapidly creates flutes and creases in leather. I designed these wheels in plasticity and printed them with the Elegoo Saturn III resin printer. I'm experimenting and dialing in the shapes so that they leave very clean impressions without marring the areas outside of the embossed lines. The resin I'm using for this is Sunloose Toughness, and I've had a lot of success with it so far. It's holding up really well with the first project, and I'm exposing it to a lot of forces with this one. I can see it wearing down, so I'll be experimenting with their ABS-like resin, as well as playing with settings on some of the future prototypes. The end goal will be to produce these in metal, but even so, these prototypes have lasted through all of my tests and through the whole Gauntlet project, and they still have some mileage. Given how cheap each wheel would be, I think it's well worth printing at home if you have a 3D resin printer. And obviously this concept can apply to many other tooling techniques. Embossing leather with a roller is nothing new after all, so I'll keep experimenting and expanding the range of tools and designs so that any leatherworker can justify getting a resin printer to print their own embossing wheels and other tools at home. If you think these tools and techniques would be useful in your own crafting projects, you should know that these and many others are coming very soon. I'm almost ready to release some prototypes to our community, so if you want beta access when these are ready, please follow the link in the description. It's a huge time saver, but these tools are not a substitute to learning the techniques by hand, which is why I'll be following up this video with an advanced technique guide that demonstrates the process in great detail, and this will be included with anyone purchasing the Berserk or Elven bundles. Now that a lot of the heavy lifting is done, I can start the tooling process. Please note that I have an advanced tooling guide that will accompany the purchase of the pattern or bundle on the Academy, so I'm mostly going to focus on providing an overview and extra tips in this video. In case you're wondering about the plastic bag, this is the more authentic use of the term casing. Historically, I believe the term comes from saddle makers who would stick their wet leather into a case, meaning an airtight enclosure of some kind, and that would preserve the moisture content until you're ready to resume tooling or working on the piece. It also helps make the moisture content more consistent throughout the leather. I'm adding a bit of additional moisture in the areas that I know will be worked more heavily and need more depth. First, I'm using an edge skiver to bevel the backs of all of the pieces. I'm omitting the top because I want the sharp edges for aesthetic reasons this time. To make the design features more prominent, I'll be using a swivel knife to cut in the creased areas. I'll start with a smooth wide beveler and bevel both sides of the cut lines. This particular tool is one that I made. Then I'll blend that bevel with an extra wide beveler. This one is from Robert Beard. The mini anvil I'm using is also from Weaver Leather Supply. It's one I bought long ago, even before we partnered on content, and it's served me well over the years. It has some nice shapes that help you work on delicate pieces, and to set rivets in tough spots. Here's a pro tip for you. When you're done with the tooling and shaping, to achieve better function, slightly trim down the portion seen here. This will let the leather glide over the Chicago screws in the areas like this where the fit is rather tight and precise. Another part you should consider trimming is the underside of the leading edge. The purpose of this is to prevent a hard edge of the leather that will dig in and mar the layer beneath it. It will also reduce friction so it moves a little better. Another set of tools I'm working on are these 3D printed forming blocks. Even these early prototypes are turning out to be very useful all the time. I put up a video on this a little while back if you want to see more, and you'll see me use these throughout the full tooling guide as well. I've got quite a number of other shapes planned that'll be coming out later. This chisel and crease block is another tool I'm working on. There are various shapes that I'm testing internally, but the way it'll work is you'll chisel from the top of the leather into the crease block, which will make a clean indent into the leather, or strike it from the back of the leather to make a raised fluting impression. This project also makes great use of the 3D printed leather forming shapes which I previewed a while back. Almost nobody watched those videos. I'm guessing most of you don't understand why I'm suddenly introducing 3D printing as a content pillar of our channel, but this is a part of it, and these tool designs are something I've been thinking about for years, and I think these tools can improve the efficiency, capabilities, and quality of life for leatherworkers and general artisans with some useful projects they can print themselves affordably at home. In one case in point, this fin-shaped piece makes forming the creases and flutes in leather easier than ever. And there are many complex shapes on the knuckle parts, so having the small raised dome is super effective here too. And yeah, I've improvised for decades at this point with whatever tools I've had around, and I've gotten by, and I know you can too, but there's no virtue in struggling needlessly. And at this point, I incorporate all the time-saving tools and techniques where I can. There are quite a few steps to achieving the fluting technique, at least to make it look good. but I have another tool in my arsenal that speeds up the process. I'll also be making a whole video on this tool soon, but this is one of the more secret techniques I've not really shared yet, but I think it's time. This is a way to motorize some of the leather tooling and beveling processes. I know, it seems like cheating, but let me remind you that for years we've been making really big head-to-toe suits, and there's a lot of borders and tooling to do. While this doesn't replace hand tooling, it greatly speeds up the long lines of bevels, and for quickly cleaning up tooling. In the upcoming video, I'll be showing you how you can make this yourself very affordably, and I'm working on some custom tips to fit the device which will expand the number of effects you can achieve with it. If you want to be alerted for the tools I'm working on, and if you want beta access and all that, click the link below, and subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to see the free videos that are on the way too. I'll continue working the pieces, and again, the complete explanation and demonstration of tooling techniques will be included in a separate video at our academy for this build. To color the parts, I'll be using Phoebing's Black Pro Oil Dye. I like to use these propagation trays to help confine the mess and reduce cleanup. For the smaller pieces, I can quickly just dip each one into a cup of dye. For the mid-sized pieces, I'll just use a sponge to apply the dye. For the finish, I tend to use Weaver's Tough Coat, and I'll let the product soak into the leather, which will help harden the leather without making it brittle. I like to use a blue shop tail to help keep the finish even as it dries. I don't generally suggest that you use the acrylic finish on buckle straps because it will make it too stiff. I suggest instead that you oil them with something like top grade saddler's oil or neat's foot oil. I don't necessarily want the high gloss in this case, and I think a matte finish will look good here, so I'll use a Scotch-Brite style pad to remove the shine. I demonstrated the manual technique for this in the Warrior series, but following the trend of speeding up production, using a cheap oscillating sanding tool speeds up this process greatly. Now we can move on to the assembly of the gauntlet. I'll start with the arm pieces first. There's a support strap that runs down the center. Trim down the top and bottom ends of the strap for comfort. Start by riveting the strap to the top arm piece. There will be an assembly diagram included with the pattern that you can use for quick reference. The rivets I'll be using here are black double-capped rivets. If you're wondering about the trays I'm using, these are resin projects Ashley has made. She's working on some resin-related videos right now which will be put up soon. We'll attach the buckles to the arm plates as we go. I'll be using the Z145 black buckles from Weaver Leather. For the upper arms, I'm using 3/4 inch buckles. I'm using 5/8 inch buckles for the wrists. The extra long strap attaches to the top panel on the inside and goes all the way around the arm. Chicago screws will be used to affix each section to the next. Do a test assembly first to confirm fit, but when you're finished, be sure to use some thread lock or some glue to prevent the screws from coming loose over time. The small buckle strap goes to the lowest arm panel around the wrist. Next, we need to prepare the thumb pieces. This starts with 4 small rivets to connect the split together. To do this, we'll be using the thumb's retainer strap. Take care to get a tight fit. You can also use a Chicago screw as a placeholder to hold the holes in position. And after you set the rivets, you can flatten the joint pieces a bit more at the seams. The next piece attaches with 2 Chicago screws. The following pieces attach with rivets. I suggest you size the finger straps according to fit after the gauntlet is mostly finished, and be sure you're wearing the gloves you plan to wear with the suit when sizing, or you can size them to fit snugly on your fingers without the gloves. There's a small connector piece that will join the thumbs to the rest of the gauntlets. These are attached with Chicago screws and it's fixed to the top wrist piece. It also helps to flatten the piece because the Chicago screw is going to go through an extra layer. The fingers are assembled next. Each one of the fingers comes with a backing retainer with built-in finger loops. They are labeled from 1 to 4. The finger scales are also labeled, but if you lose track at any point, you should know that 1 and 3 are identical in size, and the number 2 is the longer middle finger, and of course 4 is the smaller pinky finger. Start the assembly at the tops of each finger. One of the finger scales will have a hole in it, and that connects the knuckle plate to the finger backing. Most of the hardware in this video can be found at Weaver Leather Supply. The only exception would be these low-profile Chicago screws from US Bind. You could just use rivets here, but I wanted to try to find a mini Chicago screw for unique applications like this. These are 1/8 inch deep, and you only need 8 of them. Each finger will have 3 normal scales which will attach to the backing pieces next. I'll be using small double cap rivets for all of these. And the tips of each finger will draw to a wider claw tip. The finger loops can be marked and fit later when the gauntlet is assembled. The horn of this mini anvil works great for this. Now we need to attach the fingertips to the knuckles. You'll just need 2 medium double capped rivets for each finger. The holes are marked on the knuckle pieces, but if your efforts in the wet forming stage did not yield a precise result, you may want to adjust the hole slightly. You can set the rivets from the back using a normal setter, but in the spirit of streamlining these videos a bit, I'm going to start using more of the tools at my disposal, such as this rivet press, which makes setting rivets even in hard to reach places a breeze. The hand parts have a couple of retaining straps. The curvy piece cups your thumb as shown here, and connects to the straighter strap with a small rivet, and this wraps around the back of your thumb. Assembling the knuckle plates and the wrist pieces come next. The knuckle plate labeled A attaches to the hand plate labeled B. Work your way back, assembling one plate at a time. Tighten the Chicago screws down snugly at first, but when you go to glue them, slightly back off the screw pressure until there is a little slack to allow the plates to articulate smoothly. The retaining strap will loop over the thumb, back onto itself, and can be connected at any point on the wrist that fits the best. Any joints that require the Chicago screw to go through more than 2 layers, you can thin out slightly from the underside first. Thank you for watching our content. I hope you enjoy it and get some useful tips and ideas for your own builds, and even feel inspired to take on fun builds like this. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to our channel. And to support our work, please consider purchasing our patterns, visiting our sponsors, or becoming a guild member at our academy.